In a previous draft of this letter, one I've since deleted, I told you how I came to be a writer. How I, the first in our family to go to college, squandered it on a degree in English. How I fled my shitty high school to spend my days in New York, lost in library stacks, reading obscure texts by dead people, most of whom never dreamed a face like mine floating over their sentences, and at least of all, that those sentences would save me. But none of that matters now. What matters is that all of it, even if I didn't know it then, brought me here, to this page, to tell you everything you'll ever know. What happened was that I was a boy once bruiseless. I was 8 when I stood in the one-bedroom apartment in Hartford staring at Grandma Land's sleeping face. Despite being your mother, she's nothing like you. Her skin 3 shades darker, the color of dirt after a rainstorm, spread over a skeletal face whose eyes shone like chipped glass. I can't say what made me leave the green pile of army men and walk over to where she lay, under a blanket on the hardwood, arms folded across her chest. Her eyes moved behind their lids as she slept. Her forehead, lashed deep with lines, marked her 56 years. A fly landed on the side of her mouth, then skittered to the edge of her purplish lips. Her left cheek spasmed a few seconds, the skin, pocked with large black pores, ripped in the sunlight. I had never seen so much movement in sleep before, except in dogs who run in dreams none of us will ever know. But it was stillness. I realized now that I saw it, not of her body, which kept ticking as she slept, but of her mind. Only in this twitching quiet did her brain, wild and explosive during waking hours, cool itself into something like calm. I'm watching a stranger, I thought, one whose lips creased into an expression of contentment alien to the land I knew awake, the one whose sentences rambled and rattled out of her schizophrenia only worse now since the war. But wildness is how I'd always known her. Ever since I could remember, she flickered before me, dipping in and out of sense, which was why, studying her now, tranquil in the afternoon light, was like looking back in time. The eye opened. Glazed by a milky film of sleep, it widened to hold my image. I stood against myself, pinned by the shaft of light through the window. The second eye opened, this one slightly pink, but clear. "You hungry, little dog?" she asked, her face expressionless, as if it was asleep. I nodded. "What should we eat in a time like this?" She gestured around the room. A rhetorical question, I decided, and bit my lip. But I was wrong. I said, "What can we eat?" She sat up, her shoulder-length hair splayed out behind her like a cartoon character just blasted with TNT. She crawled over, squatted before the toy army men, picked one up from the pile, pinched it between her fingers, and studied it. Her nails, perfectly painted with manicured by you, with your usual precision, were the only unblemished thing about her. Decorous and ruby-glossed, they stood out from her calloused and chapped knuckles as she held the soldier, a radio operator, and examined it as though a newly unearthed artifact. A radio mounted to his back, the soldier crouches on one knee, shouting forever into the receiver. His attire suggests he's fighting in World War II. "Who you are, monsieur?" she asked the plastic man in a broken English and French. In one jerking motion, she pressed his radio to her ear and listened intently, her eyes on me. "You know what they tellin' me, little dog?" she whispered in Vietnamese. "They say," she dipped her head back to one side, leaned into me, her breath a mix of Ricola cough drops and the meaty scent of sleep. The little greensman head swallowed by her ear. "They say good soldiers only win when their grandmas feed them." She let out a single, clapped cackle, then stopped. Clipped cackle. Her expression suddenly blank, and placed the radio man in my hand, closed it into a fist. Like that, she rose and shuffled off to the kitchen, her sandals clapping behind her. I clutched the message, the plastic antenna stabbing my palm as the sound of reggae, muffled through a neighbor's wall, seeped into the room. I have and have had many names. Little Dog was what Lan called me. What made a woman who named herself and her daughter after flowers call her grandson a dog? A woman who watches out for her own, that's who. As you know, in the village where Lan grew up as a child, often the smallest or weakest of the flock, as I was, is named after the most despicable things. Demon, ghost, child, pig snout, monkey born, buffalo head, bastard, little dog being the more tender one. Because evil spirits, roaming the land for healthy, beautiful children, would hear the name of something hideous and ghastly being called in for supper, and pass over the house, sparing the child. To love something, then, is to name it after something so worthless that it might be left untouched and alive. A name, thin as air, can also be a shield. A little dog shield. I sat on the kitchen tiles and watched Lan scoop 2 steaming mounds of rice into a porcelain bowl rimmed with painted indigo vines. She grabbed a teapot and poured a stream of jasmine tea over the rice, just enough for a few grains to float in the pale amber liquid. Sitting on the floor, we passed the fragrant steaming bowl between us. It tasted the way you'd imagine mashed flowers would taste, bitter and dry, with a bright and sweet aftertaste. True peasant food, Lan grinned. This is our fast food, little dog. This is our McDonald's. She tilted to one side and let out a huge fart. I followed her lead and let one go myself, prompting us to both laugh with our eyes closed. Then she stopped. Finish it. She pointed with her chin at the bowl. Every grain of rice you leave behind is one maggot you can eat in hell. She removed the rubber band from her wrist and tied her hair in a bun. They say that trauma affects not only the brain, but the body too. Its musculature, joints, and posture. Lan's back was perpetually bent, so much so that I could barely see her head as she stood at the sink. Only the knot of tied-back hair was visible, bobbing as she scrubbed. She glanced at the pantry shelf, empty save for a lone half-eaten jar of peanut butter. I have to buy more bread. One night, a day or two before Independence Day, the neighbors were shooting fireworks from a rooftop down the block. Phosphorescent streaks raked up the purple, light-polluted sky and shredded into huge explosions that reverberated through our apartment. I was asleep on the living room floor, wedged between you and Lan, when I felt the warmth of her body, which was pressed all night against my back, vanish. When I turned, she was on her knees, scratching wildly at the blankets. Before I could ask what was wrong, her hand, cold and wet, grabbed my mouth. She placed her finger over her lips. "Shh! If you scream," I heard her say, "the mortars will know where we are." The streetlight in her eyes reflecting jaundiced pools on her dark face. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the window, where we crouched, huddled under the sill, listening to the bangs ricochet above us. Slowly, she guided me into her lap, and we waited. She went on, in whispered bursts, about the mortars, her hand periodically covering my lower face. The scent of garlic and tiger balm sharpened my nose. We must have sat for 2 hours like that, her heartbeat steady on my back as the room began to gray, then washed in indigo, revealing 2 sleeping forms swaddled in blankets and stretched across the floor before us. You and your sister, Mai. You resembled soft mountain ranges on a snowy tundra. My family, I thought, was this silent Arctic landscape. Placid, at last, after a night of artillery fire. When Lan's chin grew heavy on my shoulder, her exhales evening out in my ear, I knew she had finally joined her daughters in sleep. And the snow in July, smooth, total, and nameless, was all I could see. Before I was Little Dog, I had another name. The name I was born with. One October afternoon, in a banana-thatched hut outside Saigon, on the same rice paddy you grew up on, I became your son. As Lan told it, a local shaman and his 2 assistants squatted outside the hut waiting for the first cries. After Lan and the midwives cut the umbilical cord, the shaman and his helpers rushed in, wrapped me, still sticky with birth, in a white cloth, and raced to the nearby river, where I was bathed under veils of incense smoke and sage. Screaming, ash smudged across my forehead, I was placed in my father's arms, and the shaman whispered the name he had given me. It means patriotic leader of the nation, the shaman explained. Having been hired by my father, and noticing my old man's gruff demeanor, the way he puffed out his chest to widen his 5'2" frame as he walked, speaking with gestures that resembled blows, the shaman picked a name, I imagined, that would satisfy the man who paid him. And he was right. My father beamed, Lon said, lifting me over his head at the hut's threshold. My son will be the leader of Vietnam, he shouted. But in 2 years, Vietnam, which 13 years after the war, and still in shambles, would grow so dire that we would flee the very ground he stood on, the soil where, a few feet away, your blood had made a dark red circle between your legs, turning the dirt into fresh mud, and I was alive. Other times, Lon seemed ambivalent to noise. Do you remember that one night, after we had gathered around Lon to hear a story after dinner, and the gunshots started firing off across the street? Although gunshots were not uncommon in Hartford, I was never prepared for the sound, piercing yet somehow more mundane than I imagined. Like Little League home runs cracked one after another out of the night's bark. We all screamed. You, Aunt Mai, and I, our cheeks and noses pressed the floor. Someone turn off the lights, you shouted. After the room went black for a few seconds, Lon said, What? It's only 3 shots. Her voice came from the exact place where she was sitting. She hadn't even flinched. Is it not? Are you dead, or are you breathing? Her clothes rustled against her skin as she waved us over. In the war, entire villages would go up before you knew where your balls were. She blew her nose. Now turn the light back on before I forget where I left off. With Lon, one of my tasks was to take a pair of tweezers and pluck, one by one, the gray hairs from her head. The snow in my hair, she explained. It makes my head itch. Will you pluck my itchy hairs, little dog? The snow's rooting into me. She slid a pair of tweezers between my fingers. Make Grandma young today, okay? She said, real quiet, grinning. For this work, I was paid in stories. After positioning her head under the window's light, I would kneel on a pillow behind her, the tweezers ready in my grip. She would start to talk, her tone dropping an octave, drifting deep into narrative. Mostly, as it was her way, she rambled, the tales cycling one after another. They spiraled out from her mind, only to return the next week with the same introduction. Now, this one, little dog, this one will really take you out. You ready? Are you even interested in what I'm saying? Good, because I never lie. A family story would follow, punctuated with the same dramatic pauses and inflections during moments of suspense or crucial turns. I'd mouth along with the sentences, as if watching a film for the umpteenth time, a movie made by Land's words and animated by my imagination. In this way, we collaborated. As I plucked, the blank walls around us did not so much fill with fantastical landscapes as open into them, the plaster disintegrating to reveal the past behind it. Scenes from the war, mythologies of men like monkeys, of ancient ghost catchers from the hills of Dalat, who were paid in jugs of rice wine, who traveled through villages with packs of wild dogs and spells written on palm leaves to dispel evil spirits. There were personal stories, too, like the time she told me of how you were born, of the white American servicemen deployed on a Navy destroyer in Cam Ranh Bay, how Lan, met him wearing her purple dye, the split sides billowing behind her under the bar lights as she walked, how, by then, she'd already left her first husband from an arranged marriage, how, as a young woman living in a wartime city for the first time with no family, it was her body, her purple dress, that kept her alive. As she spoke, my hand slowed, then stilled. I was engrossed in the film playing across the apartment walls. I had forgotten myself into her story, had lost my way, willingly, until she reached back and swatted my thigh. Hey, don't you sleep on me now. But I wasn't asleep. I was standing next to her as her purple dress swayed in the smoky bar, the glasses clinking under the scent of motor oil and cigars, of vodka and gun smoke from the soldiers' uniforms. For me. Help me, little dog. She pressed my hands to her chest. Help me stay young. Get this snow off of my life. Get it all off my life. I came to know, in those afternoons, that madness can sometimes lead to discovery. that the mind, fractured and short-wired, is not entirely wrong. The room filled and refilled with our voices as the snow fell from her head, the hardwood around my knees whitening as the past unfolded around us. And then there was the school bus. That morning, like all mornings, no one sat next to me. I pressed myself against the window and filled my vision with the outside, mauve with early dark. The Motel 6. The Klein's laundromat. Not yet opened. A beige and hoodless Toyota stranded in front of a yard with a tire swing half tilted in dirt. As the bus sped up, bits of the city whirled by like objects in a washing machine. All around me the boys jostled each other. I felt the wind from their quick jerked limbs behind my neck, their swooping arms and fists displacing the air. Knowing the face I possess, its rare features in these parts, I pushed my head harder against the window to avoid them. That's when I saw a spark in the middle of the parking lot outside. It wasn't until I heard those voices behind me that I realized the spark came from inside my head, that someone had shoved my face into the glass. "Speak English," said the boy with the yellow bowl cut, his jowls flushed and ripping. "The cruelest walls are made of glass, Ma." I had the urge to break through the pane and leap out the window. "Hey!" The Joel boy leaned in. The Jow boy leaned in, his vinegar mouth on the side of my cheek. "Don't you ever say nothing? Don't you speak English?" He grabbed my shoulder and spun me to face him. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." He was only 9, but had already mastered the dialect of damaged American fathers. The boys crowded around me, sensing entertainment. I could smell their fresh laundered clothes, the lavender and lilac in the softeners. They waited to see what would happen. When I did nothing but close my eyes, the boy slapped me. "Say something." He shoved his fleshy nose against my blazed cheek. "Can't you even say one thing?" The second slap came from above, from another boy. Bullcut cut my chin and steered my head towards him. "Say my name, then." He blinked, his eyelashes long and blonde. Nearly nothing quivered. "Like your mom did last night." Outside, the leaves fell, fat and wet as dirty money, across the windows. I willed myself into a severe obedience and said his name. I let their laughter enter me. "Again," he said. "Kyle." "Louder." "Kyle." My eyes still shut. "That's a good little bitch." Then, like a break in the weather, a song came on the radio. "Hey, my cousin just went into their concert." And, like that, it was over. Their shadows cleared above me. I let my nose drip with snot. I stared at my feet, at the shoes you bought me, the ones with red lights that flashed on the soles when I walked. My forehead pressed on to the seat in front of me. I kicked my shoes, gently at first, then faster. My sneakers erupted with silent flares, the world's smallest ambulances, going nowhere. That night you were sitting on the couch, with a towel wrapped around your head after your shower, a Marlboro Red smoldering in your hand. I stood there, holding myself. "Why?" You stared hard at the TV. You stabbed the cigarette into your teacup, and I immediately regretted saying anything. "Why'd you let them do that? Don't close your eyes. You're not sleepy." You put your eyes on me, blue with smoke swirling between us. "What kind of boy would let them do that?" Smoke leaked from the corner of your mouth. "You did nothing." You shrugged. "Just let them." I thought of the window again, how everything seemed like a window, even the air between us. You grabbed my shoulders, your forehead pressed fast to my own. "Stop crying. You're always crying." You were so close I could smell the ash and toothpaste between your teeth. "Nobody touched you yet. Stop crying. I said stop, damn it." The third slap that day flung my gaze to one side. The TV screen flashed before my head snapped back to your face. Your eyes darted back and forth across my face. Then you pulled me into you, my chin pressed hard to your shoulder. "You have to find a way, little dog," you said into my hair. "You have to, because I don't have the English to help you. I can't say nothing to stop them. You find a way. You find a way, or you don't tell me about this ever again, you hear?" You pulled back. "You have to be a real boy and be strong. You have to step up or they'll keep going. You have a belly full of English." You placed your palm on my stomach, almost whispering, "You have to use it, okay?" "Yes, Ma." You brushed my hair to one side, kissed my forehead. You studied me, a bit too long, before falling back on the sofa, waving your hand. "Get me another cigarette." When I came back with the Marlboro and a Zippo lighter, the TV was off. You just sat there, staring out the blue window. The next morning, in the kitchen, I watched as he poured the milk into the glass as tall as my head. "Drink," you said, your lips pouted with pride. "This is American milk, so you're going to grow a lot, no doubt about it." I drank so much of that cold milk it grew tasteless on my numb tongue. Each morning after that, we'd repeat this ritual. The milk poured with a thick white braid. I'd drink it down, gulping, making sure you could see, both of us hoping the whiteness vanishing into me would make me more of a yellow boy. I'm drinking light, I thought. I'm filling myself with light. The milk would erase all the dark inside of me with a flood of brightness. "A little more," you said, rapping the counter. "I know it's a lot, but it's worth it." I clanked the glass down on the counter, beaming. "See?" you said, arms crossed. "You already look like Superman." I grinned, milk bubbling between my lips. Some people say history moves in a spiral, not the line we have come to expect. We travel through time in a circular trajectory, our distance increasing from an epicenter only to return again. Our circle removed. One circle removed. Lan, through her stories, was also traveling in a spiral. As I listened, there would be moments when the story would change. Not much, just a minuscule detail, the time of day, the color of someone's shirt, 2 air raids instead of 3, an AK-47 instead of a 9mm, the daughter laughing, not crying. Shifts in the narrative would occur, the past never a fixed and dormant landscape, but one that is re-seen. Whenever we want to, or not, we are traveling in a spiral. We're creating something new from what is gone. "Make me young again," Lan said. "Make me black again. Not snow like this, little dog, not snow." But the truth is I don't know, Ma. I have theories I write down, then erase and walk away from the desk. I put the kettle on and let the sound of boiling water change my mind. What's your theory about anything? I know if I asked you, you'd laugh, covering your mouth, a gesture common among the girls in your childhood village, one you've kept all your life, even with your naturally straight teeth. You'd say no, theories are for people with too much time and not enough determination. But I know of one. We were on a plane to California. Do you remember this? You were giving him, my father, another chance, even with your nose still crooked from his countless backhands. I was 6, and we had left Lon behind in Hartford with Mai. At one point on the flight, the turbulence got so bad I bounced on the seat, my entire tiny self lifted clean off the cushion, then yanked down by the seatbelt. I started to cry. You wrapped one arm around my shoulders, leaned in, your weight absorbing the plane's throttle. Then you pointed to the thick cloud bands outside the window and said, "When we get this high up, the clouds turn into boulders. Hard rocks. That's what you're feeling." Your lips grazing my ear, your tone soothing. I examined the massive granite-colored mountains along the sky's horizon. Yes, of course, the plane shook. We were moving through rocks, our flight a supernatural perseverance of passage. Because to go back to that man took that kind of magic. The plane should rattle. It should nearly shatter. With the laws of the universe made new, I sat back and watched as we broke through one mountain after another. When it comes to words, you possess fewer than the coins you saved from your nail salon trips in the milk gallon under the kitchen cabinet. Often you gesture to a bird, a flower, or a pair of lace curtains from Walmart, and say only that it's beautiful, whatever it was. "Thep kwai," you once exclaimed, pointing to the hummingbird whirring over the creamy orchid in the neighbor's yard. "It's beautiful." You asked me what it was called, and I answered in English, the only language I had for it. You nodded blankly. The next day, you'd already forgotten the name, the syllables slipping right from your tongue. But then, coming home from town, I spotted the hummingbird feeder in our front yard, the glass orb filled with a clear, sweet nectar, surrounded by colorful plastic blossoms with pinhead holes for their beaks. When I asked you about it, you pulled the crumpled cardboard box from the garbage, pointed to the hummingbird, its blurred wings and needled beak. A bird you could not name, but could none the less recognize. "Thep kwai," you smiled. "Thep kwai." When you came home that night, after Lon and I had eaten our share of tea rice, we all walked the 40 minutes it took to get to the sea town off New Britain Avenue. It was near closing and the aisles were empty. You wanted to buy oxtail to make bun bo hue for the cold winter week ahead of us. Lon and I stood beside you at the butcher counter, holding hands, as you searched the blocks of marbled flesh in the glass case. Not seeing the tails, you waved to the man behind the counter. When he asked if he could help, you paused for too long before saying in Vietnamese, Doi bo, an ko doi bo kong. His eyes flicked over each of our four faces and asked again, leaning closer, Lon's hand twitch in my grip. Floundering, you placed your index finger at the small of your back, turned slightly so the man could see your backside, then wiggled your finger while making mooing sounds. With your other hand, you made a pair of horns above your head. You moved, carefully twisting and gyrating so he could recognize each piece of the performance. Horns, tail, ox. But he only laughed, his hand over his mouth at first, then louder, booming. The sweat on your forehead caught the fluorescent light. A middle-aged woman, carrying a box of Lucky Charms, shuffled past us, suppressing a smile. You worried a molar with your tongue, your cheek bulging. You were drowning, it seemed, in air. You tried French, pieces of which remained from your childhood. Derrière de vache, you shouted, the veins in your neck showing. By way of reply, the man called to the back room, where a shorter man with darker features emerged and spoke to you in Spanish. Lon dropped my hand and joined you, mother and daughter twirling and moving in circles, Lon giggling the whole time. The men roared, slapping the counter, their teeth showing huge and white. You turned to me, your face wet, pleading, Tell them! Go ahead and tell them what we need. I didn't know what oxtail was called. Oxtail. I shook my head, shame welling inside me. The men stared, their chortling now reduced to bewildered concern. The store was closing. One of them asked again, head lowered, sincere. But we turned from them. We abandoned the oxtail, the bun bo hue. We grabbed a loaf of Wonder Bread and a jar of mayonnaise. None of us spoke as we checked out, our words suddenly wrong everywhere, even in our mouths. In line, among the candy bars and magazines, was a tray of mood rings. You picked one up between your fingers and, after checking the price, took 3, one for each of us. Tep quoi, you said after a while, barely audible. Tep quoi. No object is in a constant relationship with pleasure, wrote Barthes. For the writer, however, it is the mother tongue. But what if the mother tongue is stunned? What if the tongue is not only the symbol of a void, but is itself a void? What if the tongue is cut out? Can one take pleasure in loss without losing oneself entirely? The Vietnamese I own is the one you gave me, the one whose dictation and syntax reach only the second-grade level. As a girl, you watched from a banana grove your schoolhouse collapse after an American napalm raid. At 5, you never stepped into a classroom again. Our mother tongue, then, is no mother at all, but an orphan. Our Vietnamese, a time capsule, a mark of where your education ended, ashed. Ma, to speak in our mother tongue is to speak only partially in Vietnamese, but entirely in war. That night I promised myself I'd never be wordless when you needed me to speak for you, so I began my career as our family's official interpreter. From then on, I would fill in our blanks, our sentences, stutters, whenever I could. I code switched. I took off our language and wore my English, like a mask, so the others would see my face, and therefore yours. When you worked for a year at the clock factory, I called you boss. I called your boss and said, in my most polite dictation, that my mother would like her hours reduced. Why? Because she was exhausted, because she was falling asleep in the bathtub after she came home from work, and that I was afraid she would drown. A week later, your hours were cut. Or the times, so many times, I would call the Victoria's Secret catalog, ordering your bras, underwear, leggings, how the tall ladies, after confusion from the prepubescent voice on the other end, relished in a boy buying lingerie for his mother. They'd awed into the phone, often throwing in free shipping, and they would ask me about school, cartoons I was watching. They would tell me about their own sons, that you, my mother, must be so happy. I don't know if you're happy, Ma. I never asked. Back in the apartment, we had no oxtail, but we did have 3 mood rings, one glinting on each of our fingers. You were lying face down on a blanket, spread on the floor with lawn straddled across your back, kneading the knots and stiff cords from your shoulders. The greenish TV light made us all seem underwater. Lon was mumbling another monologue from one of her lives, each sentence a remix of the last, and interpreted herself only to ask you where it hurt. 2 languages cancel each other out, suggests Barths, beckoning a third. Sometimes our words are few and far between, or simply ghosted, in which case the hand, although limited by the borders of skin and cartilage, can be that third language that animates where the tongue falters. It's true that, in Vietnamese, we rarely say I love you, and when we do, it's almost always in English. Care and love, for us, are pronounced clearest through service, plucking white hairs, pressing yourself on your son to absorb a plane's turbulence, and therefore his fear. Or now, as Lan called me, little dog, get over here and help your mother. And we knelt on each side of you, rolling out the hardened cords in your upper arms, then down your wrists, your fingers. For a moment, almost too brief to matter, this made sense. The 3 people on the floor, connected to each other by touch, made something like the word family. You groaned with relief as we worked your muscles loose, unraveling you with nothing but your own weight. You lifted your finger and, speaking into the blanket, said, "Am I happy?" It wasn't until I saw the mood ring that I realized you were asking me, once more, to interpret another portion of America. Before I could answer, Lon thrust her hand before my nose. "Check me too, little dog. Am I happy?" It could be, in writing you here, I'm writing to everyone. For how can there be a private space if there's no safe space, if a boy's name can both shield him and turn him into an animal at once? Yes, you're both happy, I answered, knowing nothing. You're both happy, Ma. Yes, I said again. Because gunshots, lies, and oxtail, or whatever you want to call your God, should say yes over and over, in cycles and spirals with no other reason but to hear itself exist. Because love, at its best, repeats itself, shouldn't it? I'm happy. Alon threw her arms in the air. I'm happy on my boat. My boat, see? She pointed to your arms, splayed out like oars, she and I on each side. I looked down and saw it, the brown, yellowish floorboards swirling into muddy currents. I saw the weak ebb, thick with grease and dead grass. We weren't rowing, but adrift. We were clinging to a mother the size of a raft until the mother beneath us grew stiff with sleep, and we soon fell silent as the raft took us all down this great brown river called America, finally happy.